Okay, so that's a song that many, if not all of us, are familiar with. I am a friend of God. And we get up and we sing that song with gusto and fervor and whatever else you want to use to describe how you sing. But we belt out this I am a friend of God. But are you really a friend of God? What is a friend? And we'll admit that the definition for friend varies from person to person. So my definition of a friend might not be your definition of a friend. But usually your friend is the person that you run to with everything. The minute something even becomes a thought, you run and you want to you just can't wait to tell your friend. Something good happens, something bad happens. Even if or if nothing happens, you still want to share things with your friend. Your friend is somebody you spend hours with on the phone. Your friend is someone who, even if you haven't seen that person for a long, long, long time, when you get back together, it's like you pick up where you left off. That is a friend. If you're in trouble, the first person you call is your friend. Exciting news, first person you call is your friend. So, with that in mind, is God really your friend? You're here talking, I am a friend of God, I'm a friend of God. Are you being a friend to God? When things happen, when things go well, or maybe not, or they don't go well at all, as the case may be, is God the first person you run to? Or you run and tell somebody else? Somebody else who, yeah, is actually your friend, but in many cases, God is not the person we run to first. So, are we really being honest when we sing, I am a friend of God? When we examine this symbiotic relationship, and I'm just going off some things I wrote, I jotted down in December 2018. I don't know, I can't recall now what was happening that made me make these notes, but I was asking myself this question, or these questions. But am I really a friend of God? When we examine the symbiotic relationship of friendship, are you really a friend of God? Am I really a friend of God? Friendship suggests that I tell you my deepest and you do the same. I help you, you help me. You're the first to know, not the last. You're the first to know. Do I tell God my deepest and darkest? Do you tell God your deepest and darkest? And I think the answer that most of us would give to something to that question is most times or sometimes. But if we're really honest, God, and I'm just using this term loosely, God is lucky if we tell him second or third. Because usually we get to God after we've gone through telling everybody else. So God tends to fall in the bracket of last to know. Is that friendship? Or is it that we just assume that he knows? Because that is part of the problem. It's because God knows everything. He's all knowing, he's omnipotent, he's omni everything. We tend to just assume that, hey, yeah, he knows, he's God after all. So I don't necessarily have to go and tell him. But then how can you say you're his friend and you're not willing to share these exciting things? Or is it that God is only our friend when we want something and we run to him and say, Lord, do this for me, do that for me, and what have you. And Lord, if you get me out of this scrape, I'll never do this again. That's not friendship. That's using. That's using. So that means we are not friends of God. We are users of God. And that's shameful. That's shameful. And notice I said we, because I'm as guilty as anybody else. So we just assume that, okay, he knows, therefore we don't have to tell him. Let's look at Romans 11 verses 33 to 35. And I have it here from the Amplified Bible. Romans 11, 33 to 35. And it says, "Oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments and decisions, and how unfathomable and untraceable are his ways. For who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor, or who has first given to him that it will be paid back to him?" And I want to look specifically at verse 34, because verse 34 says, "For who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor?" Do you know the mind of the Lord? Have you counseled God? You haven't even gone to him and told him the things that are happening in your life until it reaches crisis stage. And then God becomes our 911, our emergency, or our solver and solution for all our emergencies. But we're not being friends of God. We're not sitting with God. We're not having... We don't know his mind. And when you have a friend, you know how your friend thinks. When you hear things, sometimes you say, not my friend. I know her. She wouldn't do that, or he wouldn't do that. And you can see that because you know the mind of God. You know the mind of your friend, rather. And you have been that person's counselor. Who hath known the mind of the Lord, or who hath been his counselor? Not you, not me. God can't even trust me or you to be faithful for an extended period of time. So how then can we be jumping up, I am a friend of God? Friend which part? No, we're not. We're falling short again. So if we can't be faithful for an extended period of time, how then do I take my, as my peeps say, you bump yourself and say you're a friend of God? You wish. We wish. John 15 verse 15. "I no longer call you servants. Instead, I have called you friends." John 15 verse 14 says, "You are my friends if you do what I command you to do." See, there's a condition upon this friendship. We just jump on it and say, "Oh, I'm a friend of God." But we can be friends of God But there is a condition attached to this friendship, and the condition is that we do as he commands. Am I doing what he commands? For the most part, yeah. And the same thing goes for many of you who are going to be listening to this or watching this. Are you keeping his commands? You are my friends if you do what I command you. James 2 and verse 23 says, Abraham believed God, and he was called God's friend. So it is possible to be God's friend, but there's something that you need to do, there's something that I need to do. Then I guess that although I can't do anything for Christ, and although I am a woeful embarrassment most of the time, if not all of the time, guess what? He still considers and calls me his friend. Wow. I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do. And yet he's willing to look past all of that and call me his friend. He has just one condition. One condition. Do what he commands. And if we're going to be honest, most of us usually don't do what he commands. But we're his friends. He calls me his friend. This friendship is so unbalanced though, because it's as I said earlier, I'm a user. I'm a user because I cannot hope to do for God even a smidgen of what he does for me. So it's an unbalanced friendship. Sometimes, maybe you've been in that situation, or you know of somebody who has been in that situation where two people used to be friends but they're not friends anymore. Why? Because one found out that the other one was a user. Yeah. Similar situation going on here. I am forever on the receiving end of God's goodness. We are forever on the receiving end of God's goodness. If that was the sake in our earthly friendships, we wouldn't be friends with certain people. And definitely not for long. Even if you started out as friends, you wouldn't remain friends for very long. I don't help Christ. It's always him doing the helping. So what's the lesson here? Maybe we need to stop seeing friendship as needing to be reciprocal. Because we can never ever hope to equate our contribution to the friendship with God's contribution. So maybe we need to just get rid of this reciprocity in this friendship arrangement. Even with a power imbalance, we can still have a thriving relationship with Christ. Christ has told me all he has learned from his Father. That's John 15 and verse 15. And yet, having told me all that he has learned from his Father, his judgments are unsearchable, and his ways past finding out. Romans 11 verse 33. We are friends, even though I'll never give him anything. As it says in verse 35. He might have told me everything his Father told him, but yet I don't know his mind. And I'm not going to say whose fault is that, because I don't think it's a matter of fault. It's just something to think about. One thing is for sure. We are wretched. Or as my peeps say, you're wretched. Yeah. we are wretched, unworthy friends. But in spite of our wretchedness, our unworthiness, and in spite of me being chief among sinners, if God can consider me to be his friend, guess what? I'll take it in a heartbeat. I'm not saying, oh, it's unbalanced. I'm not going to point out to him that I'm not really doing much for you. He says, he calls me friend. And if Christ calls me friend, God calls me friend, yes. Hi, friend.